Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Those who might be new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. In these challenging times, we've been broadcasting 3 to 4 events live each day into the homes of parents, students, and educators all across North America. So this is a pretty special week. June 8th was World Ocean Day. But here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we like to celebrate all week long. So we have 20 events lined up with ocean scientists and explorers from around the world, teaching us about our ocean, the biodiversity of life found within, also highlighting the issues and the challenges it faces, but also some good news, conservation stories as well. So today's event, we're joined by Shane Gero. Shane's research focuses on acoustic complexity and social behavior of sperm whales. So for over a decade, he has been working on research projects all over the world on various whale species in tropical, temperate, and Arctic areas. The Dominica Sperm Whale Project, he's been tracking over 20 families of sperm whales in the Caribbean since 2005. Shane, it's so great to have you joining us live today. I've had the pleasure of hosting you a few times in the past. The work you do is incredible. The photos, the complexity, the family life. We're excited to learn a little bit more about the sperm whales.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just going to take a second here and switch on so everyone can see beautiful pictures of the whales rather than me.
Title slide.
Awesome. Okay, we're in business. Thanks for everybody's patience today. My name is Shane Gero, and I'm a National Geographic explorer and the founder of the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, like Joe said. But today I want to talk to you guys about the cultural lives of sperm whale families. So cultural identity has long been a unifying and divisive force in human populations. And across our history through time, language has really been what's helped us figure out who we want to spend time with or who we want to cooperate with by sort of marking or labeling other humans who come from the same place as us. But on the other hand, a lot of wars are fought over cultural differences or people who think they are different from others. And this picture here is a drawing of the most commonly spoken languages divided by the countries that they speak those. And it's really easy to see these divisions between all of the humans in the world. But we know now that humans aren't the only cultural species and that other animals, their culture pervades their entire lives. In this enormous study across all of Africa, several researchers who study primates, particularly chimpanzees, summarize the differences in chimpanzee life across all of Africa. And so it naturally sort of begs the question, are there culturally defined groups among animals? Sort of like saying, I am Canadian. But with chimpanzees, that's really hard to know because unfortunately their habitat is so broken up that if I'm a chimpanzee living in one of these sites like Gombe, where Jane Goodall did her research, I may never meet any of the animals from these other sites. And I know all the animals, all the chimpanzees that I live with personally. So there's no really need to have a language or a culture that says we are us and you are them. And so for this reason, we really need to look for culture in the ocean. Sperm whales have been sperm whales for longer than humans have walked up. And the stories that they have are literally deeper and many of them much longer than our lives, and certainly mine. And today I want to talk about one specific family. So this is Digit. That's her in the middle. And her mom, Fingers, is looking down on her, and her cousin Enigma is rubbing or hugging from below. And in these really early grainy pictures, she was already 3 meters long and weighed over a ton for sure. And that's just average for a baby sperm whale. You know, when her cousin Enigma gets to full size, or any big male, he might reach as long as 2 school buses and weigh as much as 10 of them. And a male sperm whale is the biggest toothed whale in all of the ocean. They're just like Moby Dick. But I've been following Digit and Enigma's family since before they were born. In 2005, I founded the Dominica Sperm Whale Project. And for the last 15 years, through thousands of hours, I've been following the sperm whale families' lives. And we've met over 30 families now in the Caribbean Sea. It's literally being the first time that anyone's come to know sperm whales as individuals, whether they're brothers or sisters or mom or babysitter. And when Digit's mom, dies, she's going down to hunt for squid in some of the darkest parts of the ocean. She's among the deepest and longest divers of all the animals on our planet. She can hold her breath for well over an hour and make dives 3 times deeper than a modern nuclear attack submarine. She'll actually spend most of her life, 80% of her life, in the darkness of the deep ocean, and only about 10 or 15 minutes out of every hour in the part of the ocean that the sunlight can get to and where I can observe her from the surface. So really, her world isn't about seeing, it's not about light, it's about sound. And so just like bats in the darkness of the night sky, she's evolved a system of sound, of echolocation, to find squid and navigate through the darkness. And that's why she has such a unique nose. Inside her nose is the world's most powerful natural sonar system. And it's really allowed her to exploit the deep part of the oceans that we have a hard time even getting to, and globally, that makes them a really significant part of the ocean ecosystem. They eat as much stuff from the ocean as humanity does. And their families are matrilineal. That means it's grandmothers and mothers and daughters that will live together for life. They don't migrate like other animals where they go from cold water to warm water. They stay in sort of a home range, and they communally raise and defend their babies. And all the families take turns in caring for all the little ones. Now, this is Digit's family. We've called them the group of 7. And we often name animals based on something that we can see physically because it helps us to recognize who they are. But it makes a really important point about their identity. These individuals aren't interchangeable. Pinchy will not be Finger. She's not Digit's mom. And if one of them dies, it affects all of the animals in her family. And it's really easy to tell them apart. We take pictures of their tails to tell them apart, and their tails are really unique. It's almost like human fingerprints, and each one is different. And you can see there's some that have really obvious differences and some that are quite small. Like this one, who's Mysterio, and she's also in the group of 7. And over the last few years, I've helped to build this platform called Flukebook that uses modern machine learning or artificial intelligence to not only see the sperm whale, or in this case, the humpback whale in the picture, but to recognize them and identify them through hundreds of thousands of photos in a few minutes. And so that means that for anyone listening, if you have a picture of a whale, you can help researchers make new discoveries by contributing those through the platform at flukebook.org. But to get back to the group of 7 and the animals that we know so well personally, they've really been the family of sperm whales that any human has spent the most time with anywhere in the world. And they have these rich, complicated lives in the deepest part of the ocean that we can barely even get to with the most modern submarines. And in a sperm whale family in the Caribbean, where I do my work, it's usually about 7 animals. And each family shows preferences to other families, just like, in my neighborhood, when I have a barbecue, I invite some neighbors and not others. They show just like we do. But each family has their own way of doing things. They live in a community of neighboring families that's really a multicultural oceanic society. You see, behavior is really what you do. I am eating or I am talking, but how you've learned to do it is your culture. All sperm whales do the same thing. They hunt, they swim, they breathe, but how they do it is different. Just like some humans use forks to eat dinner, and others will use chopsticks. These aren't different humans. They've just learned to be a human different. And sperm whales show differences in what they eat and how they eat, how fast they roam and where they go. They have different social behavior and probably a whole bunch of things we haven't figured out yet. And they seem to mark these cultural differences with different dialects, different sets of what we call quotas. I want to play some of those for you now. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. So that's a set of animals. That's actually 3 animals having a conversation with each other. And all the families that share the same patterns of clicks, we call a clan. And the group of 7 belongs to the Eastern Caribbean clan. And they use about 24 different coda patterns, different rhythms of those clicks. And they appear to broadcast their identity. They have one quota that allows us to tell individuals apart, another set that allows to tell which family they're from. And they have this one special one here in red that allows the whales to recognize all of the animals that belong to the Eastern Caribbean plain, all the families that share the same dialect. And the 1 + 1 + 3 sounds like this. One, one, 1, 2, 3. And that's unique to these whales. It's only ever been recorded in the Caribbean, been identical for at least the last 30 years. Calves spend about 2 years learning how to make it right. They'll actually babble before they actually make the 1 + 1 + 3 in a way that we can figure it out. And they have to learn it accurately because it turns out that when families meet at sea, they need a way to recognize each other. Because families that share the same dialect, that make the 1 + 1 + 3, will spend time together. And families that speak different dialects, different languages, won't spend any time. And these cultures, these lines between us and them are significant to them. It's not trivial. It's not just animals learning to be different from each other. It really is a part of their identity, just like it is for us. You know, where I come from defines so much of who I am and what I do. You know, by saying I am Canadian, you know that I probably like hockey and put maple syrup on basically breakfast and dinner. Now, unfortunately, these animals are at risk, especially the animals in the Caribbean. There are fewer than 400 whales in the Caribbean community today, and 1 in 3 babies born in the Eastern Caribbean won't make it till their first birthday. And every calf, especially when the families are so small and they need daughters to perpetuate their families, every calf needs to survive. And that's just not happening. The group of 7 right now is only 3 animals. We've lost a huge number of well-known animals over the last 15 years since I've been working. These are animals that I thought I would know from my environment because sperm whales can live to be 90, just like humans. They're really my other family. And so it's forced me to ask a much bigger question. What happens if they're all gone? You know, what happens when we lose an entire clan, an entire whale culture? And that's really a question we haven't answered for ourselves, for humans, for our own culture, our own identity, you know. But right now, the world seems really charged and focused on how different we are and the differences between us and them, that we're really forced to figure out and answer this question. What do we lose when we lose an entire whale's life? Because each culture, whale or otherwise, is a set of solutions that you probably learned from your grandmother about how to survive in your day-to-day life. If the Caribbean whales disappear, then we lose all of the traditional knowledge of what it means to be a Caribbean whale. And that has been given to them by generations of indigenous wisdom accumulated by their grandmother and their mom about how to survive. And that can't be recovered even if we take sperm whales from somewhere else and put them into the Caribbean. They'd be other whales from elsewhere who do things differently. And so that part of the ocean, the Caribbean Sea, will become less useful for sperm whales because they will have lost that deep reservoir of tricks to succeed along those islands. And so when we look at a regional population and that cultural diversity, the species as a whole loses some ability to survive in the world. So it's not just a way of doing things. It's not just a particular group of whales that have learned to do things in a different way. It's really a connection between the animals and the part of the ocean ecosystem that their families have lived in for generations. And this is why species conservation is about more than just numbers. Our definition of biodiversity has to include culture. You know, these cultures passed on by generations of mothers are a significant reason why these animals succeed. Now, we've traditionally managed wildlife by species, but you know, we're all humans, but our families and our countries and our people do things differently, and that's great. You know, we can't just say humans and include all of the amazing diversity that exists in what a human is. And that's true for whales too. And so I've started looking at much bigger scales. I'm running a large initiative right now called the Global Quota Dialect Fund. And I'm leading a community of researchers and contributors who've begun to map the cultural boundaries of these sperm whale clans on a global scale. And we need that to start to manage them and protect them in a much better way. We need to move beyond just looking for species and focus on the boundaries that these animals are making for themselves. Who is important in their lives? And if I've learned one thing from spending a huge amount of time in the culture of whales, it's the power of community. In the face of unimaginable obstacles in the darkest times, we have to come together to overcome these. So my take-home message from these whale stories is to go out and build bigger definitions of us. They're different, but fundamentally the same. And if we can find such deep similarities between our lives and their lives, between our values and what's important to us and what's important to them, then how different can we all be? And at a time in history when we're at our most divided, if we're going to preserve life, we have to find ways to succeed together and to find empathy for our neighbors, both above the surface and below, and value cultural diversity not only in our society, but our entire ecosystem. Thanks, everybody. Let's see if I can turn off the share.
All right, Shane. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Not only the beautiful images, not only your work, but I think a really important message that's more important today than it ever has been. And I think we as humans like to think of ourselves as so much separate from the animal world, the only ones with a culture, the only ones with a language, the only ones aware of ourselves. The more and more we look around and study the animal world, we find how wrong we are to feel that way. So amazing research that you're doing and bringing that to light. Those who are tuning in live via YouTube right now, use the chat sidebar on the right and start sending us in some questions. I can see we have Miss Meaford, grade 4 teacher in Ajax, Ontario. We've got Jennifer and Kaylee joining us from Ottawa. We've got Kayla joining us. A few others. Who else has introduced themselves? Sarah's joining us. So start getting some of those questions into the chat sidebar and I will work some of those in. But Shane, I'm really curious. You shared with us the group of 7 and how so many of them have been lost. What's behind that? Is it our activities, a combination of our activities? What's going on?
Yeah, so the answer is that we don't really know. It's really hard to establish a cause. It's really easy to say that, these two things happen at the same time, like correlation, in the same way that amongst humans, people dying on boats and people eating ice cream both go up at the same time, but eating ice cream isn't what's causing people to die on boats. But ultimately, I think the reality is that our impact is quite clear. So the few animals that we have seen after they died have been either hit by ships or entangled in our fishing lines. And increasingly, our presence in the ocean has an impact in their home in lots of different ways. And I think the reality is that it highlights to me that we've been relatively poor neighbors. And especially when we talk about families of whales that live in such a close place, they literally are our neighbors. And we need to somehow bring a connection between the people that live right next to them or anywhere to look from our side of the surface to the other, and how our day-to-day life has really dire impacts on their lives, literally.
All right. So Kayla is wondering where they got their name from, sperm whales.
Yeah, so sperm whales have a giant organ in their head that's part of the sound making machine that's in their nose. And it's full of this oil. And the oil by the whalers was called spermaceti oil. So for a long time, sperm whales were called spermaceti whales, and that got shortened. Yeah, it's a lot of the names are whaling names. So the actual part that makes the clicks that's inside their head is called the monkey lips, because it looks like two very sort of stuck together solid lips. They have another organ in their head called the junk, and that's simply because the whalers didn't use it. They threw it overboard. So that whole part of their body is called the junk. And unfortunately, it's really hard to rename some of these things that have been there for history.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was quite a history. You know, ships would go out from the US or the UK for years at a time, hunting sperm whales, collecting barrels of not only the oil, but that spermaceti as well, and that was worth a lot of money at the time.
Well, it was the oil rush of the time, right? The spermaceti oil was used to, lubricate machinery at the time. We burnt it. We made candles out of it. It was critically important. And but that to be said, we whaled them up until the 80s, well beyond our need for their oil.
Yeah. Okay. Jennifer and Kaylee would like to know how long you've been researching culture in whales for.
Yeah, so I've been studying sperm whales since 2004. We started the project in Dominica in 2005, so that's 15 years. And I worked as a graduate student. Before that, I studied dolphins. But it's something that I've always wanted to do. I think, killer whales were my favorite animal as a kid. And I was always fascinated by whales, and in particular, when it came to be a scientist and go to school, sperm whales were even more of a mystery. We knew less about them, and they dive deeply and disappear for such huge amounts of time and into a part of the ocean that we never get to see. So, but I got turned on to the idea of culture and how these animals learn to live the way they learn by going to school and working with a professor named Hal Whitehead at a university called Dalhousie University on the east coast of Canada. And he has been a pioneer in studying sperm whales, but looks at it in this lens of, how whales learn to be whales. They're not just genetic robots programmed to do whatever they're doing.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the talk, you talked a little bit about the depths that they travel to, the lengths of time that they spend at those depths. Um, what kind of tools do you use to unlock those secrets?
Yeah, so for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been working with the Marine Bioacoustics Lab at Aarhus University in Denmark. And together we've been putting out small computers on the backs of whales. And if my screen share was working better, I would show you a video of how that works. But basically, we have a really, really long pole and something about the size of a big phone, but a little bit thicker, that sticks on the back of the whale with 4 suction cups. And just like your phone, it knows which way it's looking and has 2 recorders on it so we can record their sound. And it measures, pressure to get depth. And the newer ones now have temperature, how much light. And we're starting just this year to put out tags that have video cameras on them. So not only are we getting data to understand how they move and how deep they go, but we're actually able to see what's going on when they're down there. So stay tuned. That's new stuff.
Yeah, that'd be incredible because we know they're hunting giant squid down there, and sometimes you can see the sucker marks, the scars,
Yeah.
and you get an idea of how big those must be. It'd be amazing to see that live.
Yeah, well, last year I was at sea in the Azores, and an animal brought up an Architeuthis, a dead giant squid. It must have fallen out of its mouth because it had a tooth hole in the side of it. And we laid the squid out on the deck of the boat, and it was longer than I was, and it didn't have all of its tentacles. That was just the main part of the body. So, I mean, I can only imagine what it must be like to see a sperm whale eating a giant squid, but it only makes up a very small part of their diet.
Yeah.
They still eat big squid, big, like, half my body or more. But most of the squid they eat are small.
All right. Okay, another question coming in from YouTube. Lifespan. So how long do they live for, and can you tell that while they're alive? Because I know with sharks, you have to kind of look at their vertebrae. Are you able to kind of get a good age estimate while they're still alive?
Yeah, great question. So their timeline is about ours. So they're born and they nurse for a few years. They are sexually mature in their teenage years. We think moms may go through menopause in their 40s or 50s where they stop having babies. And then we know that they can live somewhere between 70 and 90 years old. So it's very similar to human life. Um, it's next to impossible right now to age while they're alive. And the way that we know all of that information is from data from animals that were killed in the whaling. And just like trees set down a layer around them every year, and a lot of people know how to count tree rings, sperm whales will lay down a layer of tooth every year. And so if you get a tooth, then you can cut it in half. You can count how many layers of teeth there are. And that's how old the whale is. Geneticists are working on some fancy new ways to age living mammals, but you need to be able to ground truth that. And right now, that's the hardest part. We've known some of the animals in our population since they were born. Basically, any animal that's less than 15 years old. But we need another 15 or 20 years to be able to draw that curve and therefore be able to age them while they're still alive.
Yeah. Okay. So Miss Medford's tuning in. She teaches grade 4, and they've tuned into a few live streams this week. And she's curious as to how climate change is impacting the sperm whales, as well as microplastics or larger plastics in the ocean.
Yeah. So both are obviously of concern. Virtually any sperm whale or any whale that has washed up in the last several years has had large amounts of plastic in their body. With the bigger animals, obviously, sometimes that's large pieces. There was a battery cover from some Jeep-sized vehicle inside a sperm whale a couple of years ago that was recognizable as what it was. But obviously, just plastic bags and rope, fishing net, all of these things get consumed. And their impacts are many. Either it blocks them and then they can't eat anymore, or it poisons them from the inside. So plastics absolutely is a problem, even in the deep sea. Climate change is a more complicated one. We don't really know how it's going to have an impact on the deep sea and the squid species, which is what they eat, as well as we do for other things. But importantly, sperm whales play a really, really important role in fighting climate change on our behalf, because they eat stuff down deep and then they come to the surface and they leave it behind, they defecate at the surface, and that drives a huge bloom of photosynthesis at the surface, and that captures carbon from the atmosphere. And so that's called the whale pump, where they're pumping nutrients from deep in the ocean to the surface and sort of farming the surface waters. And that is a really important mechanism that fights climate change on our behalf. So it's sort of two-sided. Obviously, the impacts of climate change are going to harm them. And if and when that means losing the whales, we lose a key tool in fighting climate change in the ocean. So it's a two-sided coin, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the consumption of plastic, and you may or may not know the answer to this, Shane, but since they do feed at deeper depth, a lot of people think about plastics on the surface, but they do sink. They are found in different levels of their water column. Do you think it's a case of mistaken identity? Are they feeding on it at a deeper depth?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that we're hoping the camera tags can lead to eventually, in terms of how they do prey selection. And their echolocation is really, really good. What we know from captive dolphins, anyways, is that they can tell the difference between sort of a ping pong ball and a golf ball from a huge distance, or way farther than you would expect a visual animal to do it. So I think it's a mix of opportunism, like there's something big in the water and it's here, and its density is maybe right, and it happens to be where I feed. But and a full-on mistaken identity. But I don't think it's the same as, say, a more well-known case like jellyfish and sea turtles, where I think there probably is a realistic scenario where they can't tell the difference.
Yeah. Okay. So Casey is wondering why you chose the Caribbean clan, especially in Dominica, as opposed to another group.
Why did we go to work in Dominica? My mentor, who was one of the first people to study sperm whales in the wild, did most of his work in the Galapagos Islands, which is in the Pacific. And he's been studying them there off and on since the early 80s. But in the Galapagos, the families are a lot bigger. It's not uncommon to have families of 14 to 20 animals. And they move a lot farther, and they're farther offshore. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of babies. And we think part of that is that we did a really good or bad job of whaling out all of the males in the Pacific. And so they just aren't, they don't reproduce as much. And I wanted to study what it was like to grow up in a sperm whale family and learn to be a sperm whale. And so that's really hard if there are no babies in the family. And we had heard reports from some early work done in the 80s that all of the families in Dominica had babies, that there were lots of babies. So we went in 2005 sort of just to check it out. And sure enough, that was the case. So I'd love to say that it's only been my unique abilities as a biologist that has made this project so successful. But the reality is that we found a really unique place where we're able to follow the lives of these families. You know, the families don't move very far. Their home range is only a few hundred kilometers. But in the Pacific and the Galapagos, you know, moving a few thousand kilometers isn't unheard of. So we're seeing the same families, you know, next week, next month, next year. And so we've just sort of found a special place to try and understand sperm whales this way.
Yep. So Kayla was wondering if you could put their teeth into perspective. How big are their teeth?
Yeah, so their teeth are really interesting because you can find some animals that are, you know, 15, 16 years old, and they really don't have their teeth poking out of their jaws yet. So sperm whales are also weird in that they only have teeth in the bottom of their jaw, and they slide into holes in the top of their jaw when they close their mouth. The teeth are so big. But an adult, like a big male, their teeth can be sort of banana sized, you know, quite large. And if any of you guys are lucky enough to have a spoon for pasta, you know, that has the hole in the middle, that's what that hole in that big serving spoon is for, is to measure pasta. And that's a good idea of the size. It's hard on the computer to see because if I go closer, it gets bigger. But
yeah,
you know, two fingers wide and it can be quite long. Yeah.
All right.
And they're
so some of the photographers, some of the scientists you've worked with, I think we've hosted a couple of them, Amanda Cotton and Galen Rosenwax, and they've mentioned being in the water and you feel the, you know, when a sperm whale is communicating, you feel when they direct that sound. Can you describe that to us? Have you felt that?
Yeah, so we don't spend a lot of time in the water with them because we are trying to study what a whale is doing when it's being with other whales.
Yeah.
But it is something that we did early on, trying to learn whether or not babies were getting milk from someone other than their mom, which they do. And yes, I mean, they will echolocate on you. So when they're not making the patterns of clicks to communicate with each other, they use sound, kind of like when your car backs up, if you have a fancy car and it makes those beeps. And as it gets closer, the beeps get faster. And it's the same when they're looking at you with sound, they'll echolocate on you. And you certainly can feel it. Because we have big pockets of air in our chest, that sound resonates, right? And so that makes us super loud. It's like we glow to a sperm whale, right? Compared to a squid, which doesn't have any air pockets in its body, and so it doesn't glow the same way. So I think we're really interesting to them. And sometimes the animals show interest in the people in the water. Certainly some of the photographers in Dominica that have gone out with the first swim tours have been exceptionally lucky. But yeah, I mean, you can feel it. It's kind of like if you were sitting on a bass speaker at a concert. But they have complete control over it, right? So while we can say they're the most powerful and one of the loudest sounds that animals can make, they know that, right? And they dial those things down when they need to, so that they don't hurt each other.
Yeah. So Shane, one more question as we start to kind of get towards the end of today's event. Obviously travel's shut down right now, so you can't get where you want to be, but what are some what's next steps? How would you like to take the project forward?
Yeah, well, I think marine science, whether it's whales or anything, is really driven by tools and technology, you know, from the boats we need to get out there to the computers we're now putting on the backs of the whale. And I think we're now facing the problem of not just developing new tools to collect lots of new data, but to deliver new methods for processing and interpreting that data. And so, a few years ago, we started this collaboration with a fellow at Harvard and from the University College London, where we're trying to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to processing the audio to sort of decode, some deeper structure, looking for grammar or syntax in these animals. And I think that's where we want to go. But it requires collecting a huge amount of sound and then having the know-how to really use, AI to process that, because it's way more than any human could spend time doing. What we've learned so far is basically every minute we record, it takes us 8 minutes to process as a researcher. And so if you want to collect thousands of hours of what these animals are saying in order to sort of use a Google Translate in some way, that wouldn't be possible manually. You have to look at artificial intelligence. I think that's the next big step.
Yeah. All right. Well, one more thing on my mind is I have seen a few photos of the way they sleep in a group, kind of horizontal like that. Is there something behind that behavior, or is it just the way it works?
So the short answer is we don't really know. It's this sort of magical thing that they do very, very rarely. And we sort of call it a sperm whale forest, because when a family does it, you get these vertical bodies going down from the surface, and the boat kind of just sitting there amongst these sort of monoliths, right? And we think it has to do with their natural buoyancy, in the same way that if you hold your breath and you could hold it long enough and you're in the pool, you would find a place where you just stay. And we think that's the case too, that their nose is more buoyant, and so when they stop and they go to sleep, their body naturally kind of does this, and they just sit there. But we don't really know, but that's a pretty good guess.
All right, very cool. So after this call, anybody tuning in, I highly suggest, if you haven't seen photos before, is to look it up. It's just it's so cool looking. I think that's the best way to describe it. These massive animals just kind of horizontal in the water in a group. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it'd be like lying on your back and looking up at giant redwood trees in a forest, but upside down in the ocean.
Yeah, very cool. Well, first of all, huge thank you to everybody who tuned in live today. Thanks for sending in some great questions, joining us during Ocean Week. And Shane, thank you so much for letting us steal some of your time, sharing your research, and making it work without power.
I'm glad it made it work. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. We have a few more events tomorrow. Join us for a live event, Sea Turtles in the Florida Keys. And then we're also going to the Osa Peninsula to check out their sea turtle conservation program. So join us for a few more events tomorrow. But for now, we're going to sign off. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye, everybody.